Tre Harris is ready to be the best wide receiver in college football, and Ole Miss is helping him.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, Rebel Nation. I am your host, Steven Willis, a 10-year veteran member of the national media and a former Ole Miss staff member. Today, Locked On Ole Miss dives into the incredible gift that Ole Miss has and Lane Kiffin has received with Tre Harris and Jaxson being together for multiple years and everything that goes in that relationship. We discuss how Kiffin and Weis are working the transfer portal to kind of maximize Dart and Harris's impact in this 2024 college football run. And we also highlight the key additions of like Juice Wells and Deion Smith joining Jordan Watkins and Caden Prieskorn's all transfers. Let's take a closer look at the skill players as well, poised to lead the Rebels this season. This is the Locked On Ole Miss Podcast, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We're free and available on all the podcast apps and on YouTube. Thanks for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen every day, and a special hello to the everydayers who make the show what it is. And don't forget to find a second listen on the network. Chris Gordy at Locked On SEC, or even Zach Blackerby at Locked On Auburn, provide excellent perspectives on college football, the SEC, and of course, Ole Miss and whatever their respective school is. So check it out. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more as playoffs wind down and these sports stop sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So, Tre Harris, in my opinion, is slated to be the best wide receiver in all of college football this year. And I think Ole Miss is helping him out and has been helping him out through the transfer portal and other means. Tre Harris is one of the most physically talented wide receivers in the whole SEC at the moment. And whenever you look at what he can do, this is what he did a year ago. He had 54 catches, 985 yards, and 8 touchdowns. That's a picture against Penn State. He absolutely ripped Penn State to shreds. He is elite on the outside, and he was the number one player in the entire country going against single coverage a year ago, which means you could not cover this guy one-on-one because of his catch radius, his body control, his athletic ability, and his speed. There was a way that he was able to get to the football and make the catch. So you could not single cover this receiver and win. So teams double covered this receiver. And even so, he had 54 catches, 8 touchdowns, close to 1,000 yards receiving a year ago. So Ole Miss started to look for different ways that they could help out Tre Harris. And I do think that the relationship between Jaxson and Tre Harris, the road roommates and all of that they have a nice relationship, is going to be a major key in this football season. And Ole Miss is doing other things to help out Tre Harris to make that combination even more and more deadly. And the number one thing that they did in this offseason was go get Juice Wells. Juice Wells was the best wide receiver in the SEC, everybody thought, after the 2022 season. He got injured in 2023, required surgery, missed most, if not all, of spring practice. But he's going through some drills, I guess, right now. And if Jaxson talks about him, his eyes kind of light up. That is one way. He is a natural slot wide receiver, and the best way to remove double teams is to have 2 elite wide receivers on one side. If the defense is worried about the slot receiver on the outside guy, it's going to be hard to double team one or the other without exposing yourself to something that could be pretty fatal. So that is one way that could happen. This is one way that Ole Miss is taking care of Tre Harris and trying to eliminate double teams. You've heard me say for weeks that this Ole Miss offense has tried to remove double teams from the equation of Tre Harris. Juice Wells is a player they brought in to do just that. The next one that they brought in was Deion Smith. And Deion Smith, we all know the rumors and everything that's going on with him. But he had an Instagram story over the weekend in the wide receiver room. He came up to see Jaxson. He would not have done that just to do it. I think that he assumes that he is going to be able to make it up here and will be up here either at the start of fall camp or shortly after it begins. That's what I think. His athletic ability, his catch radius, he's returning punts at 6'4" in junior college. Deion Smith is an athletic wide receiver and somebody that can also alleviate double teams from Tre Harris, which means you can move the slot receiver to either side and you're not really going to have to worry about the double team going at Tre Harris. Now, Ole Miss also got Daquan Wright from Virginia Tech, a tight end. He's 250 pounds, but he's more of a plus wide receiver. He's somebody that can stretch the field. He is somebody that in the receiving game is going to be a problem for the defense to cover. He's going to have to get paid attention to. Caden Prieskorn, the tight end, is going to have to get paid attention to. This is his Peach Bowl where he had 10 catches, 136 yards, 2 touchdowns, even had a 2-point conversion in that game. So you can see how Ole Miss has used the transfer portal to make it easier for Trey Harris to meet his potential. So I think Trey Harris is going to be the best wide receiver in college football, not necessarily because I believe he is the most talented player in college football. I think that they have done a really good job of putting players around Trey Harris that are going to make it to where Trey Harris is that good aspect of the offense. He can be the focal point because there's weapons in other places that other teams can't ignore. Or even slow play. You have a situation, because I genuinely think the 3 wide receivers, at least by the LSU game, the 3 wide receivers that will be on the field will be Deion Smith, Juice Wells, and Tre Harris. Caden Prieskorn at tight end. When you look at the defensive back, if you are going to double team any of those wide receivers, you are automatically at a 6-man box. Because you've got 4 defensive backs. If you've had single coverage on everybody, if you put a double team on one of the receivers, you have 5 in coverage, which means you have 6 responsible for the run game. Do you see what I'm doing here? You see what I'm getting at? So another way that you can prevent the defense from being able to put those double teams into fruition is by having a strong running game. So every time they drop 5 back to double team a receiver, they get really burned in the run game. 6 people to stop the run, that's probably not very good odds when everybody is focused on the pass as well. And Jaxson Dart, of course, is going to be one of the most elite quarterbacks in Ole Miss history. We talked about yesterday what was potentially in store for Jaxson Dart if Ole Miss makes it to a playoff game as far as personal accolades and his legacy at Ole Miss. Tre Harris has the legacy. Can he be the best wide receiver to ever come through Ole Miss? We talked about him. Can he be the best wide receiver in the country? Yes, but can he be the best wide receiver to ever come through Ole Miss? Because right now it's A.J. Brown. That's period. Tre Harris is right outside that list looking at it because he had 1 year. But if you put Jaxson Dart with the NWO 2018 wide receivers, you have a team that wins 9 football games with Matt Luke, with the whole 9 yards. You have the Ole Miss football situation looks completely different. Not unlike Jordan Ta'amu as a quarterback. I think he's a really good quarterback. But if you put Jaxson Dart with A.J. Brown, with Elijah Moore, with DK Metcalf, with those guys, with Dawson Knox at tight end, the wide receiver unit is going to be pretty good. And this year, can Trey Harris be the best wide receiver that's ever played at Ole Miss? Can the Ole Miss wide receiver unit be the best that's ever come through Ole Miss? Can they catch that 2018 team with DeMarcus Lodge, A.J. Brown, DK Metcalf, Elijah Moore, Dawson Knox? Can it catch them? These are some of the storylines and questions that we're going to have going into fall camp. And we're going to start asking questions up to fall camp over the next several days. And the first question that popped in my mind after the Jaxson Dart snub thing was, can Trey Harris make it to where he's the best wide receiver in all of college football? I just laid out a case for you what all Ole Miss has done to make Trey Harris better. I've told you that Trey Harris against single coverage is basically uncoverable. Number 1 player in all of college football, according to PFF. Now, if you add other skill players, you add a run game and all of that to where double teams are not possible against whoever you're playing, you're going to see a wide receiver that's going to be very good and score a lot of points. And he's honestly going to make players like Jordan Watkins and Juice Wells even better. So it will be really interesting to see. Up next on Locked On Ole Miss, could 2024 be the year Ole Miss becomes a defensive powerhouse? Yeah, I'm serious about that. We'll dive into how it all starts on the line. Don't go away. I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer and fewer games. And the sports just aren't sportsing the way we want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app, dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. Maybe you can bet on the Ole Miss Rebels over-under on wins, which is currently set at 9.5. Or maybe you're interested in the Ole Miss being minus 122 to make the college football playoff. That's about a 54% probability, by the way. Or maybe you want to get granular and take Jaxson Dart to win the Heisman at plus 1,500. Maybe that's your flavor. That's right. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most of your summer. FanDuel, it's an official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all of that screaming and shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you each and every single day to bring you the biggest stories without all of the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, all streaming 24/7 on YouTube or in the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Also, Locked On is getting ready to launch a 24/7 streaming channel on the NFL and on college sports. So the catalog is going to get bigger, and you'll be able to see yours truly as well. And there's still time to join the Grove Collective and help Ole Miss football be elite. You can go to thegrovecollective.com and join today. So we talked about Tre Harris in the first segment of the show, and we're going to move over to the defensive line because the big story, other than the fact of all the playoff and all the rat poison that's going around about Ole Miss, the big story that's popping up is 3 Ole Miss defensive linemen made preseason All-SEC teams. You had Walter Nolan, who was a first-team player. You had Jared Ivey, who was a second-team player, and you had a Princely Amonmielen, who was a third-team player. Now, I do not agree with the order. I do not agree how they got set up necessarily, but I do agree that those 3 are really good football players, and J.J. Pegues is somehow severely underrated. The guy that was the best defensive lineman on Ole Miss's football team a year ago just kind of slides down and becomes a little bit anonymous. But when you have Princely Amonmielen and Jared Ivey on the outside, 2 edges that are going to be really good football players for you, and Walter Nolan kind of being that big guy in the middle with J.J. Pegues, you can genuinely see how Ole Miss is going to work defensively against whoever they're playing against. Now, let me explain this to you. Now, Ole Miss had a big signing class and a lot of true freshmen that are coming in as well. Ole Miss is probably 3 deep on the defensive line going into fall camp, like legitimately 3 deep. Like in 2007, 2006, when I was at Ole Miss, Cam Franklin, William Eccles, Jeffrey Rush, Cam Beavers, those guys, they would be asked to play immediately because they were really good players. When Paray Jerry and Greg Hardy got on campus at Ole Miss, when I was there, they got on the field almost immediately because Ole Miss had to have them. This is a different story. This is a different type of year to where those players are kind of going to sit down. Like Cam Franklin might pop up into the 2 deep, but it's not guaranteed, and it's definitely not a necessity. The starting 4 on this defensive line, I think, is just kind of written in marker at this moment. And Princely Amonmielen, J.J. Pegues, Walter Nolan, and Jared Ivey. Now, Princely Amonmielen has a little bit of a nagging shoulder problem that he should be ready to go by the Kentucky game. So that means Chris Hardy just kind of slides up into his position, who was an all-conference type player at defensive end at Jacksonville State. So you can see how this works. You have players like TJ Dudley and Suntaran Perkins that can also play some defensive end type stuff depending on what needs to happen. Akello Stone, Xavion Harris, those guys, Jamarius Brown. I constantly, when I talk about the defense, I forget about Jamarius Brown, and it's not intentionally, because if you want to go back to the Mississippi-Alabama game 2 years ago, the one that Suntaran Perkins was all over the field defensively, Jamarius Brown was kind of there too and causing havoc in the middle of the field. He's another guy that I think is going to make an impact this year. And then you have Jared Ivey and potentially Cam Franklin. And then you have DJ Holmes, Chamberlain Campbell, all those guys. This is a really stacked defensive line unit, and that's important. Pete Golding, in a very short time, has built a very good defensive line unit, which is the most important unit on a defense. Now, the next thing that they're doing is trying to work out the secondary. Because if you have a really good defensive line, and everybody that has watched more than probably 4 of my podcasts knows that I talk about the Alabama and the Georgia way of playing defensive line, and that is the interior guys draw double teams, causing the exterior guys to get single coverage, and they're kind of hunting, and all of a sudden the quarterbacks make mistakes, and they have some ball hawks at cornerback, and they turn you over. And that's kind of the secret sauce to this Georgia defense and the Alabama defenses of the past. So Ole Miss went out and tried to find some ball hawks. They got Trey Amos. I think Trey Amos is going to be a corner. We saw all spring. Ole Miss publicized it. The Trey Amos versus Tre Harris competition. They went at it every day in practice. So that's one side of the field we can understand. He's an excellent man-to-man coverage type corner. And with this defensive line being as dominant as we're expecting it to be, you want man-to-man coverage corners. And the other side is where it's going to get interesting, because I think Ole Miss has 4 or 5 players that have a chance to have a serious impact on this defense. You have Brandon Turnage, who for another player that I kind of pretty consistently forget about, but he's a good player. He's a Tennessee transfer. You have Chris Graves, who's a Miami transfer, who is from Southwest Florida. You have Cedric Beavers, who is the transfer from Jones County Junior College. We talked about him on what Ole Miss needs to do to make the defense elite, is both the JUCO players pan out. And then you have Isaiah Hamilton, who is a transfer from the Houston Cougars, who is another man-to-man cover guy with excellent ball skills. The whole purpose of this is, and putting high ball IQ players at safety means that when the quarterback makes a mistake, which all quarterbacks in college do, that's what they do. They make mistakes. You'll have somebody ready to take advantage of that. And then when you look at the players that could potentially play in a linebacker, I'm telling you, this defense could be a real surprise going into this season. And what is his name? Mike Nagy, something Nagy. Michael Borky had him on his podcast over the weekend. He is one of the executive scouts for the Senior Bowl, and said Ole Miss had over 20 players that have a draftable grade going into the Senior Bowl. And let me tell you what that means. That means that just looking at the player right now, there's 20 players that they are thinking could get drafted in next year's NFL draft, which would absolutely shatter every record that Ole Miss has as far as draftable players. You have players like Jaxson Dart, who could go as high as 1. The quarterbacks can go up so quickly, and if he has an explosive type year, he can do what Jaden Daniels did a year ago. So where he sits right now in mocks is not where he's going to end up. This season has a lot to say about what Jaxson Dart can do. Walter Nolan's a first-round guy. Princely Monmielen, according to PFF, middle of the first round. Diego Pounds is a guy that could be drafted fairly high. Tre Harris, odds are, since he's an Ole Miss wide receiver, he's got second round written all over him, right? You can see these players where they stack on top of each other as far as what they can do. But it was over 20 with a draftable grade, which means there's a good number of players from Ole Miss that will end up at this year's edition, or I guess next year's edition, of the Senior Bowl. So pay attention to that. But this could be the year that Ole Miss becomes a defensive power to go with all of their offense. And the team as a whole, whenever you mix those two together and that balance, we always hear about Jake Crane from Crane and Company talk about balance on a football field. And that means your offense and your defense, everything kind of works in concert. And this Ole Miss football team is going to be a very balanced, very good football team. It's going to come down to probably 2 or 3 games that are tight. And how Ole Miss does in those 2 or 3 games is going to determine whether they host a playoff game, whether they make Atlanta, whether they don't host a playoff game and just make the playoffs, and whether they miss the playoffs altogether. That is what those 3 games are going to mean for Ole Miss this season. Should be really interesting type stuff. Coming up on Locked On Ole Miss, we drive into the presumed heated fall camp battle between Austin Simmons and Walker Howard. And we just talk about who we think is going to emerge as the standout quarterback of the future for the Ole Miss Rebels. Stay tuned. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows that cover every single league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Be part of history. All right, so in our last segment, real quick, this is another storyline that's going to be a very heated storyline over the course of this fall camp cycle. Although the question for it probably needs to be asked, it will not be asked. It will not. So you need to hope for open scrimmages and something like that to go out and see exactly what's going on. Because nobody's going to talk about this, and they're not going to name a backup quarterback, in my opinion, this football season. They're going to keep this pretty cut and dry to where they alternate or do something like that to ensure that when the transfer portal window hits in the middle part of December, that Austin Simmons or Walker Howard is not in it. So you can have the competition that you expect in the spring, where they're fighting for truly all the marbles. And you have 2 quarterbacks that are kind of different, both really, really talented, okay? I cannot remember a time where the Ole Miss quarterback room was as talented as it is right now. And you even have A.J. Maddox, who is going to be the 4th-string quarterback, and in most years he would be the backup at Ole Miss. He would. But this year you've got Jaxson Dart, who is the absolute number 1 quarterback, and he should be. Then you have a combination of Austin Simmons and Walker Howard. One of those 2 is going to be the 2, one of those is going to be the 3, and then you have A.J. Maddox. Walker Howard's a good quarterback. He's the son of Jamie Howard. Do you remember he was the quarterback at LSU back in the 90s? He is the one that had the horrible day against Auburn, to where he threw 3 pick sixes or something like that in a single football game. Really crazy type stuff. But Walker Howard ended up going to LSU his first year, transferred out of LSU after his first year to Ole Miss, and he's been up at Ole Miss ever since. He's been doing the hunting, the fishing, and all of his stuff. He's friends with Jaxson Dart and Eli Acker and all of that. Walker Howard is a quiet, low-key, typical Southern SEC backup quarterback. Honestly, if you look at Jaxson Dart as Jalen Hurts at quarterback, if you want to do the Alabama thing, you have Walker Howard. He is the Mac Jones in this situation. All the talent in the world, can do all the stuff that you want him to do, just kind of quiet and goes about his business. Austin Simmons is the Tua Tagovailoa of this group, except Tua with 3 more inches is kind of what he does. He's the guy that's on social media. He plays multiple sports. He's a pitcher for the baseball team. You see him on social media throwing passes to Jalen Waddles and other Miami, Florida wide receivers, because he is from South Florida. He has kind of captured the imagination of the Ole Miss football fans in a way that Walker Howard has not, because honestly, he just hasn't done the, hey, you need to learn about me. Now, Walker Howard was on the Ivy League, the Jared Ivey podcast a while back. So maybe this is kind of starting to change, because in the court of public opinion, and before people say it doesn't matter, it kind of does. It kind of does. It's kind of like people say, well, the AP poll does not matter. Okay. I see where you're getting at, because at the end, they're just going to make up a new poll and put everybody in where they need to be. And the AP poll really has nothing to do with the selection of that playoff poll. Except this, that AP poll has probably 12 weeks of basically setting public opinion to everybody, to letting you know that this team is around number one, this team's around number two, and you get a generality idea of where teams are going to end up when the playoff poll is released, because the AP poll spent the better part of a year telling you. Same thing is going to happen in this quarterback search and this quarterback competition if we're not careful. And we are almost to the point of everybody picking sides, because I am beyond the fact of telling people not to pick a quarterback anymore, because I've seen it, like the John Rice Plumlee, Matt Corral, and the Luke Altmaier, Jaxson Dart, and the Spencer Sanders, Jaxson Dart. People at Ole Miss just liked picking teams. So they're going to pick one, whether it be Austin Simmons, whether it be Walker Howard, and they're going to ride with it forever. And it will be annoying, and it will be so loud that you can't think of anything else. But most of all, though, it should be pretty fun, because this is going to be the biggest quarterback competition in the history of Ole Miss football. It should be great. Everything that we tried to make the Spencer Sanders versus Jaxson Dart thing a year ago, this one has a chance to actually really deliver. And this year, whenever they start fall camp, I'm hoping for at least an open scrimmage or two, because I have people in Oxford that are going to be at the event, and we'll talk about those spring scrimmages or those fall scrimmages to be ready, because with no transfer portal in, 5 days or something like that, you can get away with the open scrimmages. You can get away with the depth chart. You have to play games. It's going to have to happen. So we'll see if Ole Miss is able to do that, because we have Deion and other people that are going to be in Vaught Hemingway if there is an open practice. This weekend, Juice Fest, Ole Miss is hosting that. Next year, apparently the whole month of July is dead, which means there is no Juice Fest that can happen. But I think Juice Fest is going to be at the end of May instead of the end of July. But July is going to kind of be off limits as coaches get ready to coach their ball team. Should be pretty interesting. Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen. We have the most perspective surrounding Ole Miss sports. It's one of the many reasons why we're the number one Ole Miss podcast out there, and thank you for your support. But for your second listen, check out Locked On's new venture, the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows that cover every single league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV Channels app. And for those of you on YouTube, we're going to send you there right now. Hotty toddy, everyone.